Hello, good people of YouTube. Mountbatten here, and I would like you to imagine the following scenario in your head and see if it sounds a little bit familiar. So, you load into a match. You look up at the rosters, you see you've got, let's say, 4 destroyers per side, 4 on your team, 4 on the enemy team. A number of cruisers and battleships make up the rest of your team. Maybe a CV, maybe a submarine in there too if you get really unlucky, right? So you start sailing toward whichever flank, whichever cap you're going to support, and you're waiting for the enemy team to get spotted, of course. So as the enemy team starts to get spotted, you start, with your opening salvos, or if you're a cruiser, maybe you're getting into position or whatever, because obviously, opening up right off the bat in a cruiser in the early stages of a game isn't really a great way to survive long term, right? But anyway, so you're doing your thing, is what I'm saying, in your class of ships. And then you look up, it's, let's say, the 5-minute mark. You look up at the team lineups, and somehow 3 of your 4 destroyers are already sunk. And now the enemy team maybe only lost 1, maybe 2 destroyers in the exchange. Either way, they have the destroyer advantage now. So I want you guys to just guess which team is going to win that match. Obviously, the game mirrors the number of ships on each side in terms of the class of ships. So you've got, the same number of cruisers and battleships left on the other side, but of course you're down the 3 destroyers. Well, in about 90% of the matches that I've played in, at least, the team with the destroyers left alive are going to very easily win that match, unless it's one of the exceptions, right? You've got some god guy on the other side that's just amazing at whatever ship that he plays, and he manages to hard carry the rest of the team, or the enemy destroyers just decide that, they're going to present themselves in a perfect fashion and get murdered later on in the match. I've seen both of those scenarios happen, but it happens far more often than that, is that the team with the destroyers left alive just clears the other side. And you yourself may have an amazing game. We've seen games here on the channel with that exact same scenario play out, where the guy that's sitting in the replay sometimes has a 300, we've seen a 400k damage game happen where the guy sunk like 7 ships. But guess what? The enemy team had more destroyers left alive, so they won the match. Now, why is this a problem? Or why is the video called the Destroyer Problem? Well, you see, the way the game is designed, destroyers are the single most important class on the map, with no exceptions. There is nary a ship more important than the destroyers on your side. Yes, even more important than the CV. I can hear you typing in the comments already. CVs, sure, they can provide a high degree of utility, but not to the same level as, of course, that caps destroyers. CVs can't be in multiple places at the same time anymore like they used to back in the day. RTS CVs, I can see that argument. Modern day CVs, not so much, but we'll get more on that later. I mean, think about it. Think about what every destroyer is kind of intended to do and the roles they're meant to fill. Their duties involve, first and foremost, spotting for the friendly side. This is a game with, of course, the detection mechanic. When there are no ships within inside your detection radius, you are not visible to the rest of the team. So, DDs are meant to spot for the friendly side. Again, you cannot shoot what you cannot see. Second, they're there to take caps. Usually in the opening minutes of the game, you'll see your destroyers going into the caps, at least the good ones, in most part. Again, we'll get to that later. They're meant to play the objective, or be at least near the objective, more so than, of course, cruisers and battleships, thanks to their improved detection range over these classes, right? They're also meant to be anti-destroyers, right? They're meant to be the counter to the enemy team's destroyers. If you have 2 destroyers fighting over the same cap, it's very rare that that other destroyer will be so brazen to go for the cap or be bold and, approach your enemy team to get closer to them to launch torpedoes or whatever. They won't do that if your destroyer is present around that same area. They're also meant to be area denial with their torpedoes, right? Throwing walls of skill out every so often when their torpedo tubes are reloaded, again, for the most part. And they're also meant to perform anti-submarine duties as well. On top of all of that, their depth charges are the ones that are the most efficient at murdering destroyers at murdering submarines, when you are over the submarine. More so than, of course, your little airdrop, which drops 2 depth charges. Most destroyers drop a whole smorgasbord of depth charges on top of a submarine, and one pass from them is generally more than enough to murder your average sub. This is all done by one class in the game. You think about cruisers and battleships and CVs and submarines, they do, of course, have their own duties. Cruisers are usually meant to, of course, provide most of the DPM for the match. They also are meant to murder destroyers as well, and, well, murder other ships too, but most cruisers tend to be better at murdering destroyers than other classes, right? Unless you got a really good gunboat destroyer or one of those battleships that has, the hyper-accurate number of small guns like the Mecklenburg, right? Battleships, really, they just look for alpha strike opportunities and look for, those ships that have goofed up, show their broadside, and deliver those big alpha strikes to the enemy ship. Again, depending upon what battleship we're talking about. There are some outliers like the Illinois with her, Des Moines caliber guns. CVs are just meant to bully and cause grief across the map. But, more importantly, they do provide spotting as well, but not to the same level of destroyers because, again, ideally, you have a destroyer or 2 per cap right there providing spotting for the friendly team. Of course, the CV does provide spotting when they're flying over, but of course that's all on the table to change here upcoming with the CV rework maybe soon. And of course, if that does go through, CV spotting will be greatly nerfed after that. But as of right now, of course, they can provide spotting when they fly over for a second, but most CVs won't sit there and fly their planes around and spot for you. They're out to do damage for themselves, which is, kind of what they're meant to do too. Look for those opportunistic targets that are out by themselves and stuff, and murder them. Submarines are probably the closest thing you can get to destroyers, but they aren't anywhere near as good as doing their job. Yes, they can provide spotting, and they can be quite annoying with their levels of concealment, but they don't really have the damage impact that destroyers do, because destroyers, of course, they have torpedoes, most of them do at least, right, that can, murder most ships that are silly enough or unfortunate enough to sell broadside to them and eat all of their torpedoes. And of course, a good destroyer player is going to put themselves in a spot where the enemy team least suspects the torpedoes are going to come from, and those are, of course, some of the most dangerous ones out there as a whole. Or they have, good gun power, where once they murder the enemy DDs, they can then turn their guns upon, the enemy cruisers and the enemy battleships, right? Submarines, of course, can't do that. So you have all of this in one package, in one class. I mean, again, most other classes don't have anywhere near the responsibilities that destroyers do, and yet destroyers are also the most frail class. So what, of course, this leads to is that if you have a team that understands, hey, I gotta murder the enemy destroyers in order to win the match, or to give my team an advantage, that team that does that is going to win the match, like we talked about in the intro, 9 times out of 10, which, fair enough. If you've done your homework and you understand how the game's designed and what to do in order to give your team that advantage, and then you, well, do it, obviously you should win, right? But therein lies the problem. A large portion of the player base simply does not know how the game works, it seems at least. I picked on destroyers in this video because, well, it's the easiest example that I can think of to see in game. I mean, seriously, take a look at what happens when enemy destroyers pop up on your team. A lot of times, players that are in prime positions to outright murder them would rather shoot at the battleship, way in the back and farm out his giant HP bar than shoot at the destroyer that's currently murdering their destroyer. They would also choose to, again, do something else rather than shoot at the cruiser that's actively murdering your own destroyer. When you're losing the match 5 minutes in because you didn't support your destroyers, one would think it's obvious the solution to the problem, right? Murder the enemy destroyers before they can murder your destroyers. But again, most of you guys sitting here know that already. Why? Because you're part of the rare percentage of players that heads off into the internetverse and looks up additional information, additional content about this game, which is really where most of the tutorials exist for this game. They're on YouTube. They're from watching players play on Twitch. They're from, they used to be on the forums, or I could say the subreddit, or the Discord, right? A very small percentage of the actual player base goes out and does that. Most of the players simply do not. I mean, think about the tutorial in-game. It's not really much of a tutorial at all. It's more about stuff in the port, unlocking the exterior tab. Here's your modules, here's your commander skills, here's your flags, here's your camos, here's your economic bonuses, here's your, whatever. That's what it really mostly is at the moment. There's very little actual in-game tutorialage at all. So, it's no surprise, then, when you look at it from that point of view, that players get to tier 10 simply not knowing what they're doing. Or not even tier 10, any tier, really, not really knowing what they're doing. It's a very, very steep and, unfortunately, very slow learning curve for most of the player base. So then, when you get to higher tier games where most of the player base is at, you then have players that don't know what they're doing. They don't focus on the destroyers. They don't focus on the caps. They don't focus on supporting their teammates. And then you get garbage matches back to back to back to back. One cause of it, right? There are of course, some other underlying causes of a terrible match, but this seems to be, in my opinion at least, probably one of the larger causes of those unfun, unbalanced, terrible matches that we have so often now at higher tier. It's not really a new problem either. I mean, you can go back several years and see the same thing occurring. I mean, I believe I made a video like 4 years ago talking about almost the same thing with regards to a Turpich player that didn't know how to push his damage control button. Now, naturally, that could just be a Turpich thing, but yeah. But I mean, think about that. You have a player base that hasn't really had a tutorial, and most of them have had to try and figure it out for themselves, and a percentage do most certainly go and look up guides and stuff from third-party sources. But then you go and you dump something like submarines into the mix, right? A mechanic-heavy class, if you will. Like, they can sail on the surface, but then they can go subsurface, and they can change their depth underwater, and then the detection range of their ship varies, depending if they're on surface or if they're at periscope depth, and then, also the range at which you can spot them with hydroacoustic search varies depending upon what depth they're at. And some ships have a special consumable that can spot them, some don't, and you can't see them from assured detection, yada yada, so forth and so on. You get the idea. A lot of new mechanics being dropped in the player base. Player base is slow to learn, leads to a lot of frustration at higher tiers, and submarines are still some of the lowest damage dealing ships in the match and in the game right now, thankfully so. And then, of course, you look forward to like the CV rework, where CVs are getting more complicated. They kind of just took submarines and went, and now you have travel height, scouting height, attack height, and so forth and so on. I think I messed up the name there of one of the heights, but you get what I'm saying. So unless Wargaming does something in the future to introduce some type of hands-on tutorial besides just the videos they upload to their channel, because their channel really doesn't get that many views for the size that it is, and it might be because, of course, well, they do upload some really good videos. There are some really good videos on the Warships channel about how the various mechanics in game work and how to play this and how to play that. They are some really good videos, but don't get a lot of views. Because, well, a lot of people simply won't leave the game to go watch, a video about how to play the ship. They want to play the ship. So, Wargaming needs to, in my opinion at least, and it's just my 2 cents, have some type of hands-on tutorial when you first load in a player into the game, right? Like, it puts them in a training room, and you've got some, bot ships sailing around, they put you in something, and it just, walks you through the game mechanics. This is how this works, this is how that works, so forth and so on. This is a destroyer, this is a submarine, yada, yada, yada. Something more than what they have right now, which really isn't a whole lot. So that's a massive issue, in my opinion. And hopefully, we'll see them try and deal with this in the future. They said that was one of the things that they wanted to address with the upcoming low tier rework. Kind of introduce players to mechanics at a slower rate where they can, get the grasp of one mechanic first, then they can try the next mechanic out next, and we'll see what comes of that. But just some sort of hands-on tutorial is something that the game does desperately need, especially if you want to keep adding new players to the game going forward. So, well, we'll see about that. That was just on my mind today when I was driving home and trying to think of something to talk about for today's video. So let me know what you guys think in the comments down below about, a tutorial and the need for one in-game or whatever you want to call it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Hope you guys have a wonderful Friday. It's actually Saturday. A wonderful Saturday. A wonderful rest of your weekend. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.